Welcome back to the show. Welcome back to the show. Welcome back to Indestructible Souls, the podcast for mental wellness for African American men and boys. It's been a couple of weeks, but I want to thank you for joining. And as I talked about before, I've been working on, you know, rebuilding the platform, improving the platform. And so I want to thank you guys for your continued support. And we're going to get into a very, very important series. This will be the first episode of the third season of Indestructible Souls. And we're going to get into a very important topic. But before we do, I want to yet again promote the upcoming, the next group for Hearts of Men. If you look at the flyer, it says May 12th. We did have a great show on May 12th, and the next one will be in 2 weeks, which will be May 26th. So if you know of any men that would love to join the group, so far it's been pretty good. We talk about different things that affect African American men on a daily basis. So once again, just encourage those to sign up, enjoy the show. It meets every other Wednesday at 7 o'clock. And also, you can check me out at Beauregard Therapy Monday through Saturday. You can find me on Psychology Today. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, as well as Instagram. So enough of that. So let's get into the show. So today we're going to talk about or start a series on a very important subject. And I don't think that it's talked about enough. So oftentimes we've talked much about mass incarceration. We talk much about how African American men and women are incarcerated. And so the title for today's show or the series is what we're talking about absolutely is what we call the lost ones, what I'm calling the lost ones, because we don't talk about it enough, and I don't think we understand it enough. And there's a lot that needs to be said and a lot that needs to be done. So when we talk about the lost ones, I'm talking about children of incarcerated parents. And so, like I said, today is just the first episode in the series. It's going to be a 3-part series of understanding the effects that incarceration have on children, particularly because my platform addresses African American men and boys and people in general. When we talk about incarceration, mass incarceration, understand that this affects us the most. And for one, I don't think we understand the magnitude. Maybe we do. We just don't talk about it. The magnitude that this has on our children, particularly Black boys, as well as Black girls, but how incarceration overall has decimated the Black family and continues to do so. Now, I'm not going to put this on, when we talk about sentencing and disproportionate, absolutely, that's a systematic issue. It's a racially systematic issue. However, we have to be responsible, meaning us adults, us parents, have to be responsible when we're out there taking penitentiary chances, how it affects our kids throughout the lifetime. Now, we're going to get into it. So some of you know I've worked in a prison as a substance abuse counselor for quite a while. And I also am currently working with people who either their parents are currently in prison, as well as adults who grew up without their parents because their parents were in prison. And for me, myself, my father as a young kid in and out of prison. And honestly, I'm even not sure how that affected me. And the reason being is because I had a positive support system. So it may have not affected me as bad as it could have affected others, simply because we had a strong support system at home. So when working in the prison, you know, for some of you who don't know, I worked with both men and women. I started out at the California Institution for Women, and obviously a lot of those women had children, right? And then I also worked at CRC, which is, at the time, there was two sides, and you had men on one side, women on the other side. So I'm going to make the comparison from working at CRC. One of the things that we got to understand is that when women go to prison, they don't get the support that men do. Why do I bring that up? So one of the reasons why that's so important is because when mom goes to prison, it is a lot more devastating, not only on the family, but it's a lot more devastating on the kids, because guess what happens? Oftentimes when dad goes to prison, most likely the children are still with mom. Most likely, right? However, when mom goes to prison, oftentimes the kids end up with the grandma, a relative, and sometimes even in the foster system. And before I even get to the statistics, let's just talk about anecdotally how this affects the family. Why is that important to bring up? I remember working at CRC, and the contrast from the support the women got and the contrast from the support that the men got was astronomical. And here was one of the clear examples. First off, when mom goes away, it is a lot more devastating, and it is a harder road back than it is for dad. However, I'm going to talk about the effects of the kids versus when mom goes to prison, when dad goes to prison. We'll get there. Like I said, I got 3 parts to figure this out. However, here was a clear example: visiting day. One of the things we often saw on visiting day was on Saturday, or when they would come to visit, or when families would come to visit, the families would literally camp out on the men's side 3, 4 in the morning, and they would get there 3 or 4 in the morning the day before visiting, and you're talking the line to visit miles away. However, on the women's side, what did we see? You could throw a bag of rice in there and probably not hit nobody. They didn't get the same support. Why is this important? And I'll bring it, I'll get to, I'm gonna connect all of this. So when we talk about the effects of incarceration on the family, but particularly on the children, as you can see, there is a clear difference when mom goes to prison, when dad goes to prison. However, when dad goes to prison, if he's the breadwinner, if he's the primary breadwinner and things like that, it's going to still have a profound effect. However, the kids are most likely still going to be with mom. When mom goes to prison, if dad is not in the home, or if dad is not willing to step up, what happens? It destroys the family, decimates the family. Why is this a Black issue? Well, as we know, when we talk about incarceration and how this affects kids, we already know statistically, is that Black men are incarcerated at a higher rate than any other ethnic group, statistically. So when we talk about the disproportionality, we're talking about Black men being incarcerated 6 times more than white men for similar or same crimes. So when we look at the number of children that are affected by Black children, because Black children are 25%. I'll say it this way: 25% of Black children have had at least one parent incarcerated at one time or another, right? And so what happens is when you're looking at a minimum of 25% of our children being affected by parents that have been incarcerated, we not understanding those effects are devastating. And we're going to get to it. So when we talk about the disproportionality of African Americans being incarcerated, so in this country right now, with all of the adults that are incarcerated, at least upwards up to about 3 million children are affected by having an incarcerated parent. Let's talk about how this affects kids. And there's plenty of ways that you cannot see. Why is this an important topic? Here's why. While we're fighting for what is it called? Criminal justice reform, right? While we see all of these parents and we see these things and we see all these programs where they're, which is not a bad thing, where they're trying to help parents or people reintegrate back into society. What I don't see is a lot of them restoring the family by addressing how this affects children. And I want to give you some more context. I have worked with several kids whose parents have been either incarcerated at one point, either both of them at the same time, or one or the other. Now, why am I bringing that up? Even though they may be with grandma or grandpa, some of them end up in foster care, but they become one of the most vulnerable because their primary parent or their parents are incarcerated. So now they're put in situations where they're most vulnerable, both mentally, emotionally, and physically. They become higher risk for predators within their own family. They become higher risk for predators such as obviously gang members, pimps, and all that kind of thing. So these children are at risk because their parents are away. I was working with this kid and his parents are locked up. And I can't tell you how that affects him. I can see it. He can articulate it to a degree, but just the stigma. Now, follow me on this. When we talk about stigma of having a parent in prison, some people may want to carry it as a badge of honor, like, yeah, my relatives are tough. But this is what this kid said to me, was every adult on this side of my family, which is the name that I carry, everybody on this side of my family has been to prison. Why is that such an important topic? Why is that such a key point? So when this kid obviously, well, not obviously, has experienced abuse, has experienced trauma, and trying to change that mentality, his reference point is that every person on this side of my family has been to prison. What does that say about me? Is that my destiny as well? However, not only if that says that that's my destiny, it's hard for me to see anything else. So this is very impactful when we talk about children of incarcerated parents. So I'm gonna get to more of the numbers and get to more of that stuff, but I really want you to understand this impact because we don't talk about it enough. And are there any programs that wrap around the children once mom or dad goes away? Too often, I'll just say it, too often we're worried about mom or dad or celebrating mom and dad coming home and all this other stuff, which we should. However, are we checking on the kids? Are we wrapping around the kids to see that? I get it, because sometimes grandma and grandpa are stretching themselves to take care of these kids, and when mom and dad have multiple kids, it's stressful. Imagine you have 3 kids, your parents go away, maybe one's in prison, one's on drugs, and now here it is, grandparents taking care of these kids. That's stressful on the family, not to mention how stressful it is on the kids. So let me talk about real quick some of the effects, the hard facts of how incarceration affects children. Like I said, this is going to be a 3-part series, and I'm going to have a few special guests to talk about this. People who have actually either parents who have went to prison, or they were that parent, right? So how does this affect African American, the family, and African American boys and children in general? Like I said, African American children is 6 times more likely to have an incarcerated parent at one point or another. Here's what happens. This makes us more vulnerable to dropping out of school. Children of incarcerated parents are more likely to develop a learning disability. Bet you didn't know that. And you may say, why? Well, we'll talk about it. Children of incarcerated parents are more likely to obviously have misbehavior. But here's another thing. Parents that are out there taking penitentiary chances, it is what it is, suffer from migraines, asthma, have a higher cholesterol, suffer from depression and anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder. And here's another one, homelessness. I already talked about how if dad is the breadwinner and he goes to prison, how it decimates the family. Or if mom goes to prison and dad is not willing to take care of these kids, guess what? It's either foster care or with a relative, which makes kids more vulnerable, highly more vulnerable. Now, here in the States, we are supposed to be the most civilized country on the face of the planet. However, we incarcerate more people in this country than the rest of the world. We have way more people in prison than any other country. But yet, we're supposed to be the most civilized, the most advanced, the most progressive. However, we have not come up with a solution to mass incarceration. Check this out. 1 in 3 Black men will be incarcerated or in prison at some point in their lives. 1 in 3. So if you're standing in a group of 3 men, at least one of them will go to prison or be imprisoned at one point. So when dad goes to prison, here are some of the things that are most likely. Children of an incarcerated parent at a rate of 72% will experience some type of post-traumatic stress disorder. Whether it's from the incarceration itself, whether it's having the parent abandon us to prison, whether it's the effects of the family falling apart, being stripped away of your family, becoming homeless, going hungry, all of those things affect children who have been incarcerated. They are more likely to develop anxiety, Here's another thing. Oftentimes I see grandparents bringing children, hey, he's been diagnosed with ADHD. Why is that? So one of the things we do, and when grandparents bring kids, we assess what's going on with the family. But children of incarcerated parents are more likely to have ADHD, various behavioral problems, depression, develop some type of substance use disorder, marijuana, alcohol, worse, developmental delays, learning disabilities, and obviously delinquency. People don't understand, or parents don't understand, and oftentimes I see when parents go to prison, they sometimes they lie to the kids. Oh, mom or dad is working, or they're off to school. Don't lie to your kids about where you're at. This is a teaching moment. This is a learning lesson. This is a time to be honest, and this is a time for you to teach your kids about how this works if you break the law. The problem is we're too busy oftentimes trying to protect the parent, and we're not protecting the kids. And in fact, when we start to see the behavioral problems, we treat the kids as if they're the problem. And then here comes the punishments and all this sort of thing and the consequences, when in reality, the children are the victims of incarceration. Understand that. How are children the victims of incarceration? Well, most of us, even if we don't come from a two-parent household, even if we come from a blended family, we have that support. The reason why I call this episode The Lost Ones is because children of incarcerated parents are now have all of these surrogate caregivers that may or may not care for them. And then it becomes taxing on the caregiver, whether it's grandma or someone, which makes these kids more vulnerable. But understand this from a different psychological standpoint. You as a parent reflects who that child believes they are. So when you're going to prison, when you're in and out of prison, and that sends a very solid message to how a child feels about themselves. And so often we see from this abandonment, children begin to digress or regress to a point where now school's not important. Depression sets in, anxiety sets in. They become vulnerable to the streets. They become vulnerable to the system. They become vulnerable to sexual abuse and physical abuse. Think about that. This is a very serious issue. I'm going to give you a list of different effects that children are subjected to because of incarcerated parents. Poverty. As I said earlier, if mom or dad is the breadwinner and they go away, we're talking homelessness and worse, or going to go stay with a relative that really doesn't want them there. So therefore, they're not getting the same nurturing care that they would get if they had solid parents. The other effects or vulnerabilities is alcohol and drug use, They're subject to more crime. Why is that? Because oftentimes they're living in areas that are more prone to crime, or they may engage in it themselves. More family violence. Here's a big one. They're more subject to maltreatment. What is that? Neglect, abuse, hunger, homelessness. Boys, but also mainly girls, are more subject or more at risk of sex trafficking or being sexually abused. And they're more at risk of arrest or incarceration themselves. Here's what I'm getting at. Sometimes when we start fighting the system, and we've been talking about mass incarceration and criminal justice reform, unless I missed it, have we talked about how to rebuild these children? Have we talked about how incarceration affects children and how we get them the help that they need? But here's the other thing. How do we rebuild the family? That's not easy. If my mom or dad has been gone for 10, 15 years, by the time they come home, I am not the same person. I have a mountain of resentments and a mountain of questions that I have to process through. Why was prison and crime more important than me? How do you think you could come home and be mom or dad when I've had to raise myself? Are we, when we talk about criminal justice reform, are we including the family? But here's the other thing. Are we including the Black family? Because as you can see, this affects us the most. When kids are acting out in school, are we even asking the question or taking into account that they got a parent that's incarcerated or not in the home? Because that definitely affects their ability to learn. Because we already talked about it may develop learning disabilities and other things. A lot of times, and I'm gonna say this till my career is over, when we see kids acting up, whether it's looking like ADHD or just behavioral problems, a lot of times it's trauma. So we have these teachers who are uneducated, or these educators who don't understand that the kid living with grandma with not only their siblings and maybe some cousins, because the other parents, the aunties are in prison or the uncles are in prison, and they come to school, but you expect them to act like the same little kid over here who has both parents, had a nice breakfast, slept well, didn't have to share a bed or a room with anybody. They're not going to perform the same. So this is a very important topic that we have to address. Children are often, not often, always, when our parents, when something negative happened to our parents, it affects us as children. It has long-lasting effects. And even though you may think, well, the parent is the one being incarcerated, look at how this chain reaction destroys the life of a child. I don't know if my parents being hurt. I don't know why my parent left. What does that say about me? And then here's the other thing. When we talk about stigma, I see all these other people with these what appears to be healthy families, but yet I got to go to school functions, parent teacher conferences, and all of these things and relive the fact that I don't have a parent available. So we'll continue this topic. So this is part one of a three-part series because there's so much information. And after we have our guest on, we'll talk about some of the things that we need to do to help children of incarcerated parents and minimize some of the devastation. Think about that. So we're talking about the lost ones. Now understand this, when we talk about the lost ones, here is an issue that not only affects this country because we imprison too many people, but most importantly, it affects, well, not most importantly, because everybody's important, but as you can see, this affects the Black community the most. If you have a child, a relative, a niece, a nephew, and their parent are incarcerated, check on them. Get them the help that they need. If you yourself was incarcerated for an extended period of time and you're working to rebuild your family, get your family help, get individual therapy as well as family therapy to rebuild that family. If you're still taking penitentiary chances and going back in it, let your family be and grow without you. You go do your thing. Stop interrupting their lives by your home visits. It's too devastating going in and out of prison. So, yet again, next week, we'll get into part two. And then the following week, we'll have special guests. But I wanted to introduce this topic because it's very important. So I want you to enjoy your evening, enjoy your Sunday. This has been Indestructible Souls. And don't forget that on May 24th, we will continue with our group, May 26th, we will continue our group, Hearts of Men, mental wellness group for African-American men moving forward together. And also, you can find me at Beauregard Therapy, Jonathan G. Beauregard, LMFT, in my private practice located in Colton, California. And for the rest of you, I want you to enjoy your evening, and we're out.